Should we come on to the third one of the therapist? I feel
absolutely.
Should we? Because it's
Yeah, sure.
Third element is the therapist. I mean, like all good things, therapy can be twisted to non-optimal ends. Just like the healthiest food, you eat too much, you eat it in the wrong way, you do it at the wrong time. It can be not a good idea. I should also say that we talk about therapists a bit like we talk about doctors or pilots. They're not that, sadly. A doctor or pilot is somebody who's dealing with a field of knowledge that is very quantifiable, classifiable, and the methods of instruction are incredibly rigorous and well proven, so that the worst doctor in the class is pretty good. The worst pilot in the class is going to land the plane safely. Not really the case with therapy. In that case, in this sense, therapy is closer to an art. In other words, a good therapist is a bit like a good artist. There are not that many of them around. Why they're good is a slightly mysterious. It's sort of like it's a mixture of sort of science and thought and a bit of good fortune. It's just like a good temperament to do this kind of job.
Yes.
And the reason I say this is that many of your listeners might have had experiences of therapy where they thought, I don't like this, not for me, and so I want to say something in a way kind of generous or hopeful, which is it might have been a fit between you and the therapist. Yeah. And that's not something we're encouraged, because you wouldn't say, oh, I tried medicine and I don't like medicine because, I didn't like the doctor. On the whole, this just doesn't really happen. Or I don't like flying because I had the wrong pilot. It's like, no, you didn't. They're all roughly the same. That's not the case with therapy. So it's really important to sort of hunt around, like one would for a friend. We're obviously allowed to be very choosy about who our friend is. Similar kind of thing should be allowed in this area. But
does that go the other way? Do you think therapists ever have a patient and think, oh, I don't really like this guy?
Totally. Or not I don't like this guy, but I may not be able to help this guy.
Right.
Which is really important. And it's really important, I think good therapists know that they're not going to take on just anyone, because they're not well suited to helping everyone. I think it really helps if you've been to certain places where your client has been. Some people say, well, therapists are just mad. That they're all mad. The children of therapists, they're all mad, etc. What's the point? Well, you want your therapist to be a bit mad, because only then will they have trodden down certain paths that you as the client might also have trodden down. Look, to stretch the analogy to doctors, a doctor who's been ill quite a bit could have an advantage because they kind of know it from the inside. So they're going to have that sort of close-up knowledge rather than somebody who's just read it in a book. So therapists don't need to be completely sane. They just have to know how they're insane. In fact, that's probably a general rule for life.
But again, also to bring it back to kind of my family, like, it's also that therapy is very different to in America, and like most Americans can talk and say, "Oh, I've got a therapist." There's still that thing in the UK where people like me don't go to a therapist. Do you know what I mean? It's like, or you don't want people to know that you need help. It somehow feels a bit stuck up somehow, and a bit like, I don't know, pathetic. Like, oh, I don't need that. I don't need that help.
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Like, I think, certainly from a working class point of view, it needs to be destigmatized so that people feel no shame in having help.
Yes, I mean,
But in the way you'd go to the gym and you'd have a personal trainer, that
Sure.
would be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But essentially, a therapist is a personal trainer for your brain.
Yeah, 100%. Again, it's the embarrassment of needing people. It's the embarrassment of being more complicated than we'd like to be. And, I really sympathise with people who are fed up with this. I mean, it's like going to the dentist. Who wants to go to the dentist? But, if you don't go to the dentist, you might end up with bigger problems. So it's akin to this. It's not that it's glorious and wonderful and fun. It's not. It's a bore. It's tedious. We'd all like to be simple. People who say things like, just chat to your friends, get on with it, don't moan too much and go for it. I've got every sympathy with all those approaches. Wouldn't it be lovely? And if it works for you, fantastic. But in a way, that's not who we're talking to and about now. We're talking about those moments when that doesn't work, when pulling up by your bootstraps is just not getting anywhere. And it's at that moment that we might need to kind of go for more complicated medicines, of which therapy is one.
What is, for somebody who is listening and they feel like they would like to get a therapist, is there an easy way for them to do it? What would you suggest to them? Like, from a practical point of view, it stands to reason there's going to be somebody listening going, I like the sound of this, I fancy giving it a go.
Yeah. So as I was saying before, be really ready for a bit of a hunt. Don't go to the first. Try out the first person you meet, but have an introductory conversation. Don't just say, I'm going to come. You're going to be my therapist. Say, I'd like to have a chat, 15-minute, 20-minute. Just see how you feel. See whether you think, okay, this is somebody, who I rate. The internet will always throw up all sorts of, people in your area. It's quite good to have somebody in your area. But as I say, I think ultimately it's about the right fit. Some people say, why don't you just talk to your friends? Problem with friends is that they talk a lot about themselves, understandably, because it's nice to talk about oneself. We've all got so many things on our own minds. The thing about therapists is that they're trained to shut up in the name of allowing you to get to know you. And, they've got various sort of very basic techniques. If you say something to a therapist, they will get out of the way. They'll ask a few questions following on from what you've said so that it kind of follows on logically. If you record most conversations between friends, it's such chaos. One person says something, then another person says something completely divergent, then another person asserts themselves, blah, blah, and you don't get anywhere. And that's why a lot of social conversation, though well-meaning and sometimes friendly and fun, doesn't help us to make progress with the big issues of our lives. We don't feel we've understood ourselves any better.
But you are going to know a lot about the weather in this country. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're going to know the TV that people have been watching.
Yes. It's poignant the way in which we know that social contact is something we crave, and yet we're so bad at it. I often think about, you arrive in a foreign city and they'll say, and you go, where are the people? And first of all, you're directed primarily to sort of sites like museums and war memorials, etc., which are normally not really what you've come to see. You've come to connect with people. And they'll say, oh, why don't you go to a bar? Or, this restaurant is really buzzing. The chances of you connecting, talking to a stranger in a bar and a restaurant, pretty slim. We're experts at rubbing up alongside people without ever connecting with them properly.
I've often thought, in the same way that you'd have, like, you go to a city, you could go on Tinder or Hinge or any of these dating websites. Like, if there was an app that was called, like, Stranger, let's say, where you're in, as I have been this weekend, you can be in Norway and you'd love to spend an hour with a Norwegian. Just chatting about little kind of habits and things they do.
That's a great idea.
I couldn't agree more. And hopefully somebody's listening is going to start that. And it could just be called conversation or something. And you would put in how long you've got, what you want to talk about, absolutely. And the whole business of tourism is a strange thing. I've written a few books on travel, and it's such a fascinating, we get it so wrong sometimes because we overwhelmingly privilege cultural activities. Those are the prestigious things. When really, I think what we're aching to do often is to understand the kind of soul of another nation. We're trying to understand, like, how do people here see the world? And very often it's, the chat with the taxi driver that's actually the most significant thing.
Oddly, doing stand-up in foreign countries is a really interesting way of learning about your country, I find. Because, case in point, I was in Norway this week and they have a word called ventepølse, which is a waiting sausage. So, which I think is a phenomenal excuse for gluttony. So you meet up somebody and you're like, what are you doing? Well, I was left waiting, so I ate a sausage. But it's this thing that if they're left around for too long, they will eat a sausage.
Yeah.
And it's funny to me as an English person, but then also you're learning so much about their culture and you're able to talk about it at a gig in front of 200 people.
Yeah.
And it's such a great way of like figuring things out and then realizing what you don't have in your country, what you do have, the things that make you similar, dissimilar.
That's right. And we could look at it in almost like language, like a vocabulary. The vocabulary, as we move across countries, stretches. And if there's a word or concept that's in a language, it opens up an area of feeling that you think, oh, I didn't know that word, but now that I know that word, and there's a kind of weird, slightly unfashionable word, the exotic, right? And so traditionally people went traveling in search of something exotic. And when we think of the exotic, we might think like, a palm tree or people who dress completely differently, etc. But I think we can find the exotic in lots of places. Really what we mean by the exotic is something that is a part of you, but in exile, a part of you you're not in touch with. And you find it in another culture and you think, oh, that's exotic to me because I've been yearning for that. There's a bit of me that's a bit Norwegian, a bit of me that's a bit German, there's a bit of me that is a bit Brazilian or whatever it is. And when Socrates was asked where he came from, he didn't say from Athens, he said from the world. Slightly annoying answer. But I think what he was trying to say was, to be a global citizen is to understand the debt that you owe to countries and practices way beyond your own. And that ideally is what travel should be about. But, we get it wrong, don't we, in our times?
Again, this is another one that I've misquoted you on. It's when you look at the palm tree and the sand and the sea, it's utter perfection. And you look at that picture and that's where you want to be, failing to realise that, of course, when you get there, you are there.
That is one of the great paradoxes. I wrote about that in my book, The Art of Travel, and it's this eternal paradox that we forget. We almost will have known the phenomenon that, let's say you book your summer holiday in January, and then you go on your summer holiday. You've ended up in Spain. You had that picture of the beach, the meal you were going to have, etc., and it looked perfect in the brochure and on the website. And then you go to it, and it's not that you had a terrible time, but there was this slightly unexpected thing that was like smeared across the lens of reality. That's you.
Yeah.
You came along. You with your stomach ailments and your worries and your slight anxiety about the future. I mean, the other thing that ruins every present moment is that we're worrying about what's going to happen. What comes between you and an unhampered experience of a place or a time is the future. And that's what disappears from memory. That's why memories are so much nicer than the actual event. We long to take a picture and then the moment's over and you get home, finally I can enjoy my memory because that hasn't got you in it and it hasn't got the future in it.
Yeah.
When you're sitting on that beach, you're not only sitting on that beach looking at the beach, you're also thinking, what am I going to be doing for supper? When you look back at the event, you're not looking at thinking of supper. You're actually just looking at the moment. So pictures are incredibly deceptive. We don't appreciate enough how our attention is always split between present and future, and that makes living. We've always got one foot somewhere other than where we are.
It does happen occasionally, very occasionally. You don't have to be away. Sometimes at home, very occasionally, you just get this moment where you're like, "This is all right." And you just can exist very briefly, and then you stub your toe or whatever.
Yeah.
But what defines those moments? How do you get more of that?
I think we have to realise that we're these incredibly complicated machines that have got these competing priorities, and the enjoyment of the present moment is way down the list. Most important is survival down the line, and so we're completely wired to threats in the future and what might happen. And of course, we get these threats completely wrong. Our alarm mechanisms are going off at all sorts of odd moments where they don't deserve to, and that's again coming back to therapy. Most of our alarms are wired wrongly. It's like when you were young, a man with a moustache was mean to you. So then you think, all people with moustaches might, and the alarm goes off and it's not right. And of course, this happens in relationships that people think when I get close to somebody, something bad's going to happen. Now, that might have happened when you were 4, but it's not happening now. But the alarm's still ringing, and so you get out of the relationship. You didn't need to, but the alarm was ringing. And so, come back to our old friend therapy, one of the things that might happen is you just look at the wires and you go, okay, so this alarm keeps ringing. Is it tied to anything that makes sense, or has it just got wired wrongly?
Do you, given that you're such a deep thinker, do you ever sort of luxuriate in the frivolous? So even when you talk about
Deep,
the art,
deep thinker sounds very depressing somehow.
no, it doesn't. No. But
I mean, I don't.
You're a keen observer.
Okay, keen observer. I mean, first of all, I'm not.
Have you ever been to a water park?
Sadly, a bit too often. Actually, I like
wonderful places.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. Like when you talk about being in the moment, fling yourself out of a flume. Very difficult to be thoughtful.
Yeah,
because you're too busy shitting yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the silly is a highly serious thing.
It's funny that, isn't it? Because, and again, you go back to sort of childhood. But one of the things you are taught when you're little is don't be silly. Like being silly, and it's this. And yet, the glorious moments in life very often coincide with utter silliness.
Sure, and because the best kind of silliness has got pain in there somewhere. It's a sort of protest against our mortality, the awfulness of everything.
Yeah.
It's a giant FU to the tragedy of existence. That's why tragedy and comedy are obviously very tied. It's they're millimeters apart.